Hello. I'll wait till everybody stops talking because it's my turn now. First of all, I'd like to thank the Iraq Solidarity Group here, and especially Sagine and Mike and their crew and their spouses and partners and their committee for organizing this meeting. And I have to mention that I wouldn't be here in Stockholm again if it wasn't for the Swedish committee to free the Cuban Five. I'm actually here in Europe I went to Ireland and Northern Ireland, and I'm here now working on solidarity to free the Cuban Five. Quickly, the Cuban Five were free at the Cuban Five were three. The Cuban Five were 5 anti-terrorist activists that went from Cuba to Florida to infiltrate the terrorist cells of Cubans in Florida that planned acts of terrorism against the revolution in Cuba and the people of Cuba, which killed about 3,500 Cubans over the years since the revolution. So the Cuban Five went to Florida to infiltrate this group to stop the acts of terrorism. They found out information that could be of national security interest to the United States. So they reported it to the FBI. Instead of the FBI arresting the actual terrorists, they arrested the Cuban Five. And the Cuban Five have been now in U.S. prisons since 1990. They were arrested in 1998, convicted in 1999. And of course, it's one of the big reasons that I am in solidarity with this campaign is that my son, Casey, was told that he was going to go to Iraq to fight terrorism. And so instead of prosecuting the terrorists in the United States, the United States government is protecting the real terrorists and persecuting the ones who were fighting against them. So that's why I'm here. Very quick thing about the Cuban Five. And before I start, I'd like to express my sorrow to the doctor here and to all the people from Iraq here. I know there are many of you. And my condolences, and I think saying sorry is not enough for the devastation that my country has visited on the people of Iraq and the country there. There was no new statistic that you read that I haven't heard before, but still hearing it just like drives a knife into my heart. Every statistic is like bam, bam, bam. And my son, of course, was a U.S. soldier, but we have to understand that and when he joined in 2000, we're from a working class family in the United States, a poor working class family. And education in the United States is not a right like it was in Iraq. My son felt to take the financial pressure off the family. He was recruited by a liar that made many promises to him that he broke, my son's military recruiter. So he joined the military to help pay for his college education. And then, of course, Bush happened and 9/11 happened. And Casey did not want to go to Iraq. He told everybody before he left, he was a Humvee mechanic, that he couldn't kill anyone. And then he was only there in Sadr City, Baghdad, for a few days on April 4th, 2004, when his unit, the 1st Cavalry, actually went into Sadr City and instigated trouble. They went as a show of force. They had just the change of command had just happened. They took over from the 3rd Armored Division in Germany, and so they wanted to go flex their muscles And they went out into Sadr City and they actually provoked an uprising, which is something that's very common, I understand. Of course, my son was in the 3rd or 4th wave to go, and he was ordered to go. And he told his sergeant, he said, I'm not going to go. I'm just a mechanic. I'm not going. And so to Casey's credit, he refused the order that sent him to battle, and his commander actually dragged him onto the truck, and he was dead a few minutes later. Do I blame the Iraqi resistance for my son's death? No. I've never, ever blamed the people of Iraq or the Iraqi resistance. I blame my government. I blame the military. I blame the political forces that put my son in that situation. And I agree. We owe the people of Iraq so much. We owe them reparations. Anything the people of Iraq want from the United States, we owe them. But continuing the occupation is not one of the things we... So many people talk to me like, oh, we need to stay there because if the U.S. leaves, there's going to be chaos. The U.S. actually brought the chaos, from what I understand. And, you know, a lot of people, since we, you know, the war has allegedly ended, they say, Cindy, so now you see a free and happy and democratic Iraq. Don't you think your son's life was worth that? Well, my son's life was a personal tragedy to my family. But millions of Iraqis are dead or wounded. And it's not ever going to end anytime soon in our lifetime with the toxicity and the poison that we brought to your country. The deaths are going to continue. It's still in Vietnam. The U.S. left that country in 75. And people are still dying from the toxicity and poison. Not just in Vietnam, but of course, you know, the veterans that came to the United States, came back to the United States are dying from that. And so there's also this big controversy in the States among the activist movement. Still, everybody wants to take credit for ending the Vietnam War. You know, the vets that resisted want to take credit. The students that resisted want to take credit. The peace movement that resisted wants to take credit. The draft, we had a draft. So people say it was a draft that ended the war. Nobody in my country gives credit to the Vietnamese resistance for ending that war. Of course, it was the Vietnamese resistance that ended that war. And as somebody who works for peace against war, I have to also recognize a people's right to resist an occupation. I heard from a mother of an Iraqi who was in that struggle in Sadr City on April 4th, 2004. Her son was wounded, and he later died. And she told me, you know, Miss Sheehan, we're very sorry that your son was killed. We don't want to kill your young people. But you're occupying our country. You have to understand that. We would rather not kill your young people. But, so yes, and occupied people do have the right to resist an occupation. We also have to understand that Obama, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, right? I remember I was here when he got it. I was being interviewed. And the guy, is the man here who was interviewing me that day? Anyway, I was being interviewed, and he looked at his BlackBerry or whatever he had. He goes, hey, guess what? I was like, what? He goes, Obama just won the Peace Prize. I was saying, no, you're full of He did, no, that did not just happen. You must be reading a spoof. You must be reading a spoof, because Obama could not have won the Nobel Peace Prize. And the man actually had tears in his eyes. He said, yeah, I'm not kidding. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. So, which, you know, is an absolutely ridiculous joke. But Obama did not want U.S. troops to leave the country. So now he's trying to take credit for ending that war. He's in a campaign now, right? So he's saying one of the big major things he did was get Osama, which I think is just another big lie and farce. One of the big things he says is that he ended the war in Iraq. And like you said, it wasn't the agreement between Maliki and Bush. And if it was up to Obama, many more U.S. troops would still be there. But the U.S. could not negotiate with the government of Iraq that U.S. troops would have immunity for war crimes. If that was negotiated, trust me, we'd still at least have 50 or 60,000 more troops in Iraq. The last thing that Obama wanted to do was leave Iraq. I was sitting here listening to the report before me, and what came to mind was in George Bush's last trip to Iraq when Muqtada al-Zaidi threw a shoe at him. And I was hoping that nobody here would throw a shoe at me. But I wouldn't blame you if you did. But I went to Texas once. You know that I camped out in front of George Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas, right? Calling for an end to the occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan. I camped there many, many times. I always went to Washington, D.C. I was arrested 12 times at least when George Bush was president in Washington, D.C. I spent a lot of time in jails there. And I always thought, isn't this really interesting that my country is involved in several wars of aggression saying that we're taking democracy to these countries when I get arrested for trying to exercise my rights to free speech, which is a hallmark supposedly of democracy, that my son was allegedly killed to spread freedom and democracy, but his mother speaking